Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Path to Publishing. We are joined by the lovely Grace Fell, who works at Sparkpoint Press. My name is Sophie Applin. I am one of the assistant directors for Pine Reads Review, and I'm joined by my other assistant director, Erica Britton, today. Grace, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Grace. I graduated from the U of A in 2018, so almost 4 years now. And I was in Stephanie Pirmain's Intro to Publishing class. That's kind of how I got my introduction to the publishing world. I was an English and creative writing major, so I knew I wanted to go into that world in some kind of way. Always thought I wanted to be within like the publishing realm, be an editor. But Stephanie had one of her Publicist friends from, I think it was Chronicle Books, come in and talk to the class, and that kind of like jogged my brain, like, maybe I could do this. But the publicist was pretty insistent that you had to have a master's. And so I kind of disregarded it and was like, well, I'm not getting my master's. That's just not going to be a thing. But then I graduated. I spent some time working as a server, just kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And then happened to get a Bookstagram, which I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's basically like an Instagram community for books. It really helps you get to know like the certain terminology, like what ARCs are, which are advanced reading copies, all of that good stuff. Started to become more familiar with different names in the industry. And I stumbled on BookSparks, which is the publicity sort of firm underneath Sparkpoint Studio, which is like the mother company that I'm employed by. And I started an internship last May for the summer, and I got the internship by being pretty persistent with my publicity director at the time, Keely, God bless her soul. She finally gave me the internship, and when I interviewed with her, I let her know I'm very interested in a paid position, like I'm serious about this. So I really just gave my all to the internship over the summer and was offered a paid position as an associate publicist in September of last year. Got promoted within 6 months to publicist, and next month is going to be my 1 year mark officially with the company. So that's what I'm doing right now. Super happy working in publicity. I'll probably do this forever. Of course, there are ways you can move up within the publicity aspect of publishing, but I think I'm good at what I do. I love what I do. So that's where I'm at now.
That's amazing to hear.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the lovely introduction and overview. And I'm not sure if we specified this, but Stephanie Pirmain is the lovely director of Pine Reads. So for all of our listeners, viewers, watchers of this interview, now you know. But so yeah, that's great that you got started or the interest kind of sparked in college, because Sophie and I are college students trying to figure out possible next steps for our career. Yeah. So just to kind of give an overview, because I'm not super familiar with the role of a publicist. So can you kind of describe what is a publicist and what's the role, and maybe how that's different in like publishing versus if anyone has ideas of a publicist, in some other industry or some other field?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think when I heard the term publicist, and even when we had the guest speaker come in and talk, I still had this like abstract view of kind of like Samantha from Sex and the City, where I was like, okay, she's doing something with their role in the public eye, but I had no idea what really it entailed. So publicity kind of handles the book anywhere from a year to 6 months before it's actually published. So it's kind of once like, the manuscript has gone through, and they're kind of finalizing the book to be published and go out into the world. So once it's kind of like on that way out, that's when publicists come in, and we kind of handle, it's similar to marketing, but really just what the success of the book is going to be going out and being published. So typically starts with some kind of kickoff call 6 months to a year before the book's published with the author. And we give them some kind of lowdown of like, okay, this is our plan to make sure that your book is welcomed and, appreciated by readers even before it's published. So a lot of the times we work with ARCs, which are advanced readers copies. And when people ask me out, in the world and I have 5 minutes to tell them what a publicist is, it's basically just begging people like, please read this book and review it. We'll give you a free book. We'll have a great relationship with you. But yeah, the whole point is just to get the book out into the world before it's actually published. So that involves a lot of email coordination, a lot of making PR relationships. So I have pretty good relationships now with some editors at People Magazine, some editors at Pop Sugar, which is similar to like a BuzzFeed type thing. Also have good relationships with BuzzFeed. It's kind of about working your charisma and your people skills over email so that when you're emailing editors multiple times throughout the week, they're not getting irritated with you. They're actually wanting to open your email and read your pitch, which is another huge part of being a publicist. It's a lot of pitching, writing, an email and saying like, hey, this new book is coming out in October. This is why I think you'd enjoy it. Here's a little book summary. Here's some praise. So it's a lot of emails. We work with book events too. So when an author is wanting to get their events, maybe like a little book tour schedules, we coordinate with bookstores too. So it's a lot of people skills, a lot of staying organized. There's tons of spreadsheets to keep organized in terms of who you've already reached out to, what is going on with the media, who has said, yes, they're maybe interested, who has confirmed, okay, we're definitely going to cover this book, and who has just passed and said, we have no interest in this book, like keep it moving. Does that kind of answer your question? I'm trying to go more into the details, I think, because a lot of people give a vast overview of like, oh yeah, publicity is, not really sales, not really marketing. It's kind of just, so going more into the details, it's a lot of coordinating with the media about the book to make sure that it's well received when it's actually published. And then we work with the author and the book a month to 2 months after it's been published, but that's sort of when it starts to go more into sales territory and wind down from the publicity, because a lot of what we focus on is in that 1 to 2 months before and after the book is published. That's when we try to focus the media coverage, which is what our whole goal is media coverage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always get confused a little bit between the overlap between marketing and publicity. So I really appreciate your in-depth answer there. So you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier with Stephanie Permain's Intro to Publishing class, which for anyone listening, I believe is English 389 for those who may want to take it. But so you talked about how you had a publicist or publicity assistant come in and talk to you about that. So what about that experience sparked your interest in this line of work?
Yeah. And then before I answer that too, I forgot that publicity is technically earned media, and that's different than marketing, where sometimes marketing is paid. So you're paying for the book to be promoted in some kind of way. That helped me. Yeah. But yeah, so when I don't remember her name, I wish I did, but when the publicist came in and talked about her role, I think the thing that encouraged me the most to look into publicity more than any other realm of publishing is she talked a lot about her relationship building and her communication and sort of like the charm and charisma you have to have as a publicist. And I wouldn't say that I'm a charming person by any means, but it was interesting because I do have experience, working as a server and building those people skills and being comfortable with putting myself in maybe awkward or uncomfortable situations and just kind of navigating that so that it goes smoothly. And so the idea of having a job where I am required to be a little bit more of a people person was challenging and intriguing, because I can be kind of shy and quiet, but once I get going, then I think I can be pretty comfortable with navigating social situations where I have the reins, which has been helpful in my role because when we have kickoff calls, it has a tendency to get awkward if you don't know how to navigate it correctly, because it's a conference call on the phone with an author, because we work from home. And sometimes the authors don't have good people skills, or they're nervous, or they feel a little bit tense. So it's kind of our job to warm them up and make them feel comfortable, because ultimately that's a reflection of how we're going to be with the media too. And I think that helps authors feel good. So yeah, when that publicist came into the class, it was kind of like, oh, I could do this and I could be good at it, when I think I could have been good at, an editing role or whatever it was too. But this one seemed like, because she brought that specific publicist in and seeing that publicist personality, it kind of made me think I could do this too. I saw myself in that role in the future. So I'm so glad she had that publicist come in, because otherwise I would have had no idea, you know, what the role was or what was expected of me. And I don't think I would have been able to do that research. So
yeah, that's like life-changing. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, I took the English 389 class last year. Maybe is non-existent to me. But yeah, it was really neat. Stephanie brought in different literary agents, and so I got to talk a little more and hear more about the kind of literary agent side of things. But yeah, I think it'd be really neat to talk to a publicist, and I love that as publicists are talking, you know, the gears kind of start shifting and you're like, oh, I have these skills that, you know, would kind of lend well to this. So kind of similar to that, you mentioned earlier, you know, that marketing is more like you pay for the kind of promotion advertisement, whereas PR is just building up that relationship with people. And as you're talking about having really good like social skills and like people skills, I guess. So when you started, you know, doing your research and going into working in this like realm of, you know, social relations and advertising things, did you ever consider maybe doing like something more in marketing or something that was a little different direction, but still, you know, promoting books? Or was it always like PR, I want to talk to people, like this is where my skill set works best?
Yeah, I had considered doing a marketing position, especially when, you know, I was looking for a job during COVID. I had lost my job as a server and I was like, all right, this is a great time to actually like get into the field, push myself out there. So I looked into other marketing positions as well, not even in publishing, but just in general. And I don't think there's anything wrong with marketing for me specifically. I could see myself being in that role in the future if that's kind of what happened. But I think I got lucky with the internship that I started with being a publicity internship. And so I kind of got a sneak peek at what that would look like. And, you know, some people say that publicity is a thankless job. And I kind of agree with that sometimes. So maybe marketing would be different in that way. But I think even just trying it for that first month or two, I was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I think, and maybe this is just my own projections or biases that I have gone into it in the first place, but I do know marketing seems a little less creative. Maybe that's not true. I don't have any experience with that realm, but I do think that marketing in general is an oversaturated position. And so it just doesn't have the same appeal to me. Publicity seems a little bit more exciting, and that could be all in my head, but I think I'm pretty happy with publicity. And I don't think that marketing would have the same draw for me. And it didn't really have the same draw for me in the beginning. It was kind of just like some abstract thing. And I think that does have to do with Stephanie bringing in the publicist, that I already had this idea of like, this is what a publicist looks like and does. And marketing was kind of more like vague, abstract, something I didn't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think marketing has a very interesting like theme around it, if that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of conceptions and sometimes negative feelings surrounding marketing. But I'm curious about in publicity specifically. So do you have, or did you have a lot of misconceptions going into this role, or was there anything that really surprised you about this role that was not what you had anticipated?
Yeah, I think I expected even having even more of like a social role on the position. And it very well could be that I'm working from home and I'm not, you know, out and about in the world. But I thought that I would be more of like an agent's role, like a literary agent's role when it came to my relationship with the author. I thought that I would be very, you know, hand holding and I've got your back, and very much like the author is the, you know, the center of my world when it comes to that campaign. And that's really not the case. There's definitely a lot of author management, author hand holding, explaining things to the author over and over, managing their expectations for sure. But it's more about the book and the campaign of the book versus like the author's personality. And there's not as much pressure to be socially capable of assuaging their fears and kind of guiding them through the process. I think that is more the role of their editor. And if they do have an agent, the role of their agent, they're kind of like, in their corner. Whereas I think as a publicist, we're also in their corner, but a lot of the times there have been times where I'm working with an author that I don't enjoy working with, but I really enjoy their book. And so it becomes much more about championing the book versus the author. So that was interesting. I thought that it was going to be very much like author relations, and it is for sure that that's an aspect, but I'm much more focused on the book a lot of the time than the author.
Well, really quickly before we move on, I'm curious about something that you mentioned. You talked about when you don't like an author, but you like the book. And I imagine it's much easier to do publicity for a book that you really enjoy. But what happens when you don't necessarily like the book? How do you kind of spin that in a positive light?
Yeah, that's a good question, because especially this season, because we work with fall books and then we work with spring books. And so we're kind of in the nitty gritty of the fall books right now, because they're all publishing in the next few months. And there have been a handful of books that I'm not super excited about. A lot of the times just because of the content, it's just not something that I would choose to read anyway. And that's another thing, is that I thought I had to read every single book, and I don't. I definitely will skim through to get an idea, but if I read every single book I work on, which I kind of have done a little bit this year, I think my love of reading would go down. But yeah, when I don't enjoy the book, it kind of becomes about challenging myself within the campaign versus, making it a passion project. So I love the aspects of publishing that are very detail oriented, like drafting a pitch that is just pristine and making sure that I'm hitting all of the media outlets that will probably say yes to, or at least maybe to, the book, making sure that I'm sending a pitch, 1 month and then following up 3 to 4 weeks after, getting really excited about it in an abstract sense. It's almost like checking off the boxes in my head, like, okay, I've done this, and this, and now I have to do this. And it becomes so not about books and more about that other aspect of publicity that's very like centered around emails and Google Sheets and Excel documents and all of that. So that's a good question. And sometimes it just sucks, and you complain to your coworkers and say, God, this book it's not that I'm ever like, these books suck, but it's just like, this is a hard book to place. No one wants to read this really depressing memoir that, doesn't have any exciting, it's much easier to pitch a YA romance fantasy novel. Everyone loves those. But, if it's a memoir that is really down and depressing, that's a lot harder for people to pick up. So it's just about that challenge, I think.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I like your outlook on that. It sounds like you're a little bit type A too, with like checking off the boxes. And we can both definitely relate to that.
Yeah, that is like one of the most important aspects of this job. I think, I'm not sure how it is at other publishing houses. Maybe they run things differently, but here it's very much like it's up to you to stay organized. And if you fall off that wagon, it can be really hard to get back on. And so I've seen publicists that are similar to me, where we just love the organization of it. And that's part of the reason I got promoted so quickly. And then there's other publicists that come and go because they can't figure out how to manage it themselves, and very quickly just find out that's not the position for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think, because I kind of hadn't really considered as like, what happens if you don't love the book? I think it's also interesting and like reassuring to know, because sometimes I feel like with, for example, like classes or the assigned reading, or, something where it's like, you're trying to, in your job, promote a book, it's like, do I have to read it? Do I have to know cover to cover, every page and everything? So I think that it shows really impressive skill on your part, that you can, maybe skim through pages or, read some chapters, but then really identify key selling points or things that are interesting, things that are, desired by readers. And I think it's also very telling of skill of knowing, like, maybe this is not the most desired topic or, trope, or like maybe this might be a little iffy, and, whether or not this is something that, readers want. And I know for us at Pine Reads, we're always trying to be conscious of, the books that we're reading and reviewing and, talking about and kind of promoting our own way, and what kind of content, or like themes that we are giving attention to. So kind of circling back to, you were talking about being an English, creative writing major here at the U of A. In terms of like understanding books, or, kind of being able to do some of your own like analysis or understanding ways to promote books, like what part of your major, if any, or just any of your, maybe college, young adult experiences or early career experiences have helped you be able to like really succeed in your role in understanding not only books, but, the public and kind of consumer like desires for books and publishing?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I think for starters, the easiest answer is my creative writing degree helped me a lot with like drafting pitches and getting creative. And sometimes we write roundups for certain blogs, or sometimes like we used to do it, not so much anymore, but like Pop Sugar was a big one where we would write roundups. So, best 20 YA books if you just binged this show. And we would have to write a whole roundup with little like book summaries of each one. And that can get hard when you haven't read the book, but you need to write a good summary about the book without just copying and pasting from Amazon. So I think my creative writing degree really helped me to get creative with how I write these book summaries. And I think my English major, just the workload that can come with having to read a lot and absorb a lot of information, and then know how to like write an essay on it, or, break down a passage and really look at it, or whatever it is, helped me to manage the workload that I have now, kind of like managing the chaos, knowing how to navigate all of that and not feel overwhelmed. I had a professor one time who, I was not the best student. I skipped class quite frequently. I didn't do all the assigned reading, but I was good at, even when I wasn't doing all that, showing up to class and like nailing these essays or like nailing the exams, because I knew how to like pay just enough attention that I could like process it in my brain and then give a really good essay. And I had a professor at one point, I don't think he's at the U of A anymore, but he was like, you're one of those rare students where you don't come to class, you don't do the assigned reading, but then you turn into these essays and they just make sense. And so I think that skill that I learned just because I was like, I don't want to go to class because I'm dealing with mental health issues, or I have a job that I need to show up for and I don't have time to do all this assigned reading. I think over time that was like a skill that I got good at. And so sometimes in my work, the task load I have can get overwhelming at times, which isn't to say it's always like that in publicity. I think having a smaller team and just specifically some of the things we do can get overwhelming. And I think knowing how to like digest everything and then still produce a lot of work and have it be like shiny, good work is something that I've learned over time, for sure.
Yeah. And really quick, just to like, intrigued by, how you're answering this. So like going, talking about college, us being college students, and knowing like the boundaries of, school is helpful. Like you said, these classes gave you skills, gave you writing practice, it gave you, ways and tools like analyze, text, right? But also like school's not the most important thing. Talking about like mental health is, so important, and being able to have those like personal boundaries. And working, like you said, in a professional environment, and things, get overwhelming, especially different, you were talking about earlier, the seasons of like the fall, to spring releases and things like that. So could you just kind of share like what other skills that you've learned throughout your career in like compartmentalizing, professional and personal life, and having a good balance, especially taking care of mental health with things like, the pandemic happening, and where things changed rapidly and got very stressful, and also like just any, I guess, tips that you have for someone early in their career, or maybe someone who's, been working and just feeling some of that burnout, like what works for you?
Yeah. Well, speaking as someone who just came out of burnout, which I think it kind of comes in waves, you get this rush of work and you meet that work where it is, but then the work doesn't stop. And then you kind of get more and more behind, and then you get that burned out feeling, which for me is like, I don't care about this work, I don't care that I'm not getting things done, it's too much at this point. And then you just feel crappy, and then it kind of like the dust settles, the work goes away, and then you kind of get back into it and you're excited about work again, which I'm in that phase now, coming out of the burnout. I think setting boundaries is so important, because with this job, I have a couple projects on the side that aren't necessarily due immediately, but they're things that I want to have done soon. One of them is making a master media list, which is essentially just a huge Google spreadsheet document with like tabs and tabs and tabs of media outlets and contacts and notes on like how you should pitch them or what our relationship is with them. And it's an overwhelming project because it doesn't necessarily need to be due soon, but I do want to get it done. And I get very tempted to work on the weekends to just like get it done. And it would feel accomplishing for me if I did get it done on a weekend. But I have a very strict rule with myself to not work on the weekends, because once you start working some weekends, then you start working every weekend. And then it's like the line between your life and your work gets blurred, and it just feels like you're working all the time. Similar with evenings, I don't usually work evenings unless I know like, all right, I've had a not productive day, I was on my phone too much, or I was getting distracted by my dog or whatever. I'll work a couple hours, but definitely having those hard boundaries, and then having some soft boundaries too, realizing that it's just a job. It's such a blip in the world. Even if it is an exciting career like what I'm doing right now, it's not worth getting upset over. And I think I learned that from being a server too, where, you know, I'd work my shift, and then even if it was a stressful shift, when I got home, I was like, that's it. I'm like leaving work at the door. I'm not coming home with it, which can be harder working from home because it's hard to know like, okay, 4 o'clock, time to log off. I want to just like take my computer to the couch and, you know, work from the couch while I'm watching TV or doing whatever in the evening. And so I think setting boundaries is really important. It's something I've learned in this role pretty quickly, because it is the kind of thing where like the work doesn't stop. Like it's never like you have a to-do list and you just check off everything and it's like, okay, I have no work. You can check off your task list for the week, but there's always going to be stuff in the future that you can work ahead on. And then that can get scary too, where it's like, when does it end?
That's really interesting. And I relate a lot to what you're saying about being a server and just having to leave the work at the restaurant, because it could be so stressful, especially when you have a really rough day. But hopefully you are not getting verbally harassed at your job like it's all too common in work. Yeah, but switching gears a little bit, I am kind of curious to learn about the structure of Sparkpoint Studio, because, you know, there's the difference between traditional publishing, large publishing, small publishing houses. And it seems like Sparkpoint Studio kind of also does a lot of media and marketing as well, which is, I think, kind of unusual. So could you talk a little bit about the structure of the company?
Yeah, definitely. So and this was something that took me even a second to like get a grip on. Like even after I'd been hired, I was like, can someone explain like how we're Sparkpoint Studio, but we have all these other like imprints and different things going on. So Sparkpoint Studio is like the mother company, essentially. It's sort of like in traditional publishing when you have Penguin Random House, but then you have all these smaller imprints that kind of fall underneath it. So Sparkpoint Studio is the main one. BookSparks is the publicity firm aspect. So we work in publicity with larger publishing houses where sometimes we'll get contracted out. Like we have a contract with HarperCollins. So we do a lot of HarperCollins titles, smaller publicity work for them. Or we'll have authors reach out to us and they'll hire us separately from She Writes Press and Spark Press, which I'll talk about in a second. But so like I worked with Amy Leah, who had her book published by Berkeley, which is under Penguin Random House. And that was like a romance book. And that was like, it blew up on TikTok, and you know, it was a big deal. Like it's kind of eerie sometimes to go into a bookstore and see books where I've worked with the author. I'm like, hello, like what's going on? Yeah, and so those are like the really exciting books to work on. Aside from BookSparks, we also have some imprints. We have She Writes Press and Spark Press. It kind of depends on the book, depending on, you know, which one it's going to be published in. She Writes Press is usually like memoirs and books written by women. Spark Press tends to be either if we have any male authors, or if it's like YA, or if it's fantasy. There's different things that go into deciding which book is going to be published where, but those are hybrid presses, and hybrid is different than traditional publishing, but it's different than self-publishing in that with traditional publishing, you know, you sell your manuscript to the publisher and you work with the publisher, but they kind of handle everything. Everything is in-house, and it's just you're not paying for anything necessarily. Whereas hybrid publishing, you as the author are paying for everything, but you're also making all the royalties off of the book. It works great for people who don't want to get an agent, don't want to query out their manuscript. They kind of just like want to get their book published now. And there are certain things that are in-house, like we have our publicity, but they have to pay for the publicity separate. So it's just another option. It's kind of like, I don't want to say a step above self-publishing your book, but it takes a lot of the pressure off of you self-publishing, but as an author you still kind of have the reins and you still have a lot of direction, whereas I think some authors don't want to traditionally publish because they want to have control over a lot of aspects of their book, and I don't think you get that when you're traditionally publishing. There are other aspects of Sparkpoint Studio too that like She Reads is one of our blogs that we publish a lot of like roundups or, you know, best indie book club picks for fall type of thing. And then we have a digital team as well who does certain things with Netflix. They do certain deals with those. They work with social media a lot with those different deals that they're doing. I have very little to do with that aspect. So it's kind of like still an abstract over there where like our director of operations is also in charge of a lot of digital managing. And so I hear from her when we're having a meeting, like, oh, I was dealing with this, and, you know, we're having to do this with Netflix and this with that. But it's, as a publicist, I don't deal with that a lot. So it's still something that I'm like, that's over there, and don't really have to deal with it yet. But it is cool that we have our, you know, hands in so many baskets, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it sounds like I mean, like anything, there's a lot of, you know, benefits, there's some challenges, you know, for you talking like hybrid publishing versus traditional, or you're like self-publishing. So because I think you did a really good job of explaining the pros and cons to that, I was wondering for you as someone who's worked on the inside, again, you know, in publicity, so, you know, a little different than, you know, the role of like an author or an agent, you know, or someone else in your company, but from like your point of view, what is something that maybe you wish more authors looking to, you know, publish their works would know about hybrid publishing? Or maybe, you know, for your company in particular, like other than all the amazing things and work that you're all involved in, like what's something that you think would be really neat for authors who want to publish to know specifically about, you know, Sparkpoint Studios?
Yeah, I think it's good for any author that's wanting to publish, especially for debut authors that have never published before, is to manage their expectations. I think that's something really hard that we have to work with debut authors on a lot, especially debut authors coming to an indie press and a hybrid press specifically. Is we have great media relations, but I think anytime you're choosing an indie publisher, whether it's us hybrid or someone else that's traditional, the media is naturally going to gravitate towards traditionally published books, especially bigger traditionally published houses. So, you know, your book could be amazing. I could be like, this is the best book I've ever read. It's, you know, it could deserve all of this media, but when you're a debut author and when you're picking an indie press, you know, People magazine isn't going to take that risk and include you in their magazine. I think a lot of authors come in and they've put, sometimes years and years of work into their manuscript, and now it's their baby and they're just like bringing it into the world, and they are just like, I want to do a 12-city book tour, I want to have my book in People and BuzzFeed and this and that, and you kind of have to pump the brakes and go, whoa, not only are you a debut author, no one knows who you are, but this is also a smaller publishing house where it's, no, not as many people know about us as they know about Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, or Harper. So definitely managing those expectations quite a bit, especially because publicity is a long game. So it's not like sales where we're looking for an immediate gratification of like, okay, we put in this work and next month we're going to be able to see these sales go up, or we're going to notice like instantly people raving about your book. Publicity is about letting the world know who you are and what your book is about, and kind of slowly putting that information out there so that over time and over many books, you're eventually like a familiar name that they're going to read about, if that makes sense. So managing expectations and understanding that it's a long game is important, I think, for authors to know anytime they're publishing, but specifically with smaller indie presses.
Yeah, I thought that would be really, really tough to deal with authors in that regard, because I know, at Pine Reads, we have a lot of aspiring writers, myself included, and it is just, once you get one yes, it is so hard to get a no after that. I feel like it's much harder to get a no after you've gotten a yes. So that's a really interesting aspect of your job. So kind of in the realm of books, you did mention one romance and some of the YA romance fantasies that you've worked on before. So what have been some of your favorite books to work on, either just from just a pleasure standpoint, or something like the pitch or the campaign itself was really exciting?
Yeah. I've actually had a lot of really exciting instances with thrillers and with romances or rom-coms and with children's YA for different reasons. With the YA books, it was really exciting because I was getting to work with HarperCollins and work very closely with some publicists over there. And it was really exciting to build those relationships and to hear there was one, I think she's a publicity manager. She's no longer with the company, but she loved the work that I did and was constantly reaching out to my bosses and saying like, oh my gosh, Gracie is like doing so well at author management and all of this. Like, she's running this campaign by herself. She's doing so great. And so I'm not a huge YA fan myself. I do read it sometimes, but it wasn't so much about the book as like the experience of working and learning from these publicists that are like the big shots. They're in New York, they're working for HarperCollins. So that was really exciting in that way, because I never thought that I would have the chance to work with or for a bigger publishing house like that, just given that I'm not keen on moving to New York. And so having that opportunity to like work for them but not work for them was really cool. And the thrillers, specifically this one thriller, it's called We Lie Here by Rachel Housel Hall. It published almost a month ago, actually. That one was really exciting because Rachel is, she's sold multiple books. She's been a New York Times bestseller. And so pitching her book, it wasn't like grasping at, little pieces. It was like, I would pitch it to New York Times and they'd be like, oh yeah, send me a copy. And I'd be like, New York Times answered me. Like this like really giddy feeling of like, okay, you're working with a big shot author and you're getting these responses when you work for sometimes smaller books, you're lucky if you get like maybe a smaller outlet to respond to you. And so working with these bigger books in general is just really gratifying and reminds me that, yeah, this job can be not just like sending out emails all day and not getting responses. Like some people are really excited about these books. And then romances are also my favorite because rom-com and romance authors are by far the best authors to work with. They are so sweet and funny and just like, I don't know if either of you read rom-coms or romances or like steamy romances. Yeah, these women are just so like bubbly and goofy like their protagonists. Specifically, I worked on Set on You by Amy Leah and then For Better or Worse by Erin LaRosa.
Oh my gosh, I love that book. It's so good.
Yeah, I wasn't a rom-com fan before, and then I read those two books and I was just like, oh my God, these are amazing. Like So just working with those authors where I'd be like, hey, like, you know, I have this interview opportunity, and they'd be like, OMG, yes, thank you so much. And like a bunch of heart emojis. And I'm like, you guys are the best. So those, God, Amy and Erin are like the best authors some of the best authors I've ever worked with. And I think it has to do with, they're just excited to be writing these books, and yeah, they're awesome. So that's why I love working on rom-coms.
Oh, that sounds like a dream, honestly. It would be so cool to be able to have those author relationships. And what a fascinating look into like the backside of publishing and what the author process is like. And that's really
neat. It's awesome. I love it.
I'm interested, which by the way, talking about, you know, rom-com books, romance books, just so you know, Sophie, big fan, a lot of the people on our staff. It's become a recent topic of conversation. And I've just started reading more kind of like rom-com books, you know, things a little outside, you know, the YA genre. And I'm like, wow, it's kind of fun, kind of good time over here. So I think it's fun to hear that like those authors are equally enjoyable to work with as their books are to read. I'm just really quick, kind of interested to know, other than just, you know, if like a debut author versus an established author, so like that obviously makes a difference on the campaign, but do campaigns look different across genres like YA compared to a thriller or a romance, or is there kind of just a standard procedure and it just depends on, you know, who responds, or is there different ways that you go about trying to, you know, get this book out if it's a YA, you know, contemporary book, or if it's a YA fantasy versus a thriller or romance meant for more older, more adult audience?
Yeah, so overall, the structure of the campaign is going to look very similar. You know, we have the same timeline, we have the same standard kickoff call and the same plans to do pitching and this and that. But the tone of the campaign is going to be wildly different depending on what you're working on. Specifically with, you know, if I'm pitching a memoir that's more serious, you're typically going to have a more serious tone throughout the whole campaign. Specifically, I worked on a book called Kabar, and the author was Madhushree Ghosh. It was a food memoir that braided personal essay with tales of immigration and how food, you know, coming from her country to here made her feel at home here. It was a great book, but it was a very serious book, and the author was very serious about her writing, which I really respected. But it meant that the pitches weren't, you know, goofy and lighthearted to write. It was like, it took a lot of focus to make sure that I was doing her book justice in the pitches that I was writing and explaining, and, you know, letting media know why they should be picking this book up. And the types of media that we were pitching were going to be very different from something else, because a lot of the times we were also pitching her content. So she would write essays, personal essays, and we would be pitching those essays around to different outlets that would hopefully publish them. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, when I am working on a YA romance and thrillers and YA in general, they all have a similar tone where it's more playful, and usually the authors are a little more playful and the outlets are more fun to interact with, I think. And your pitches, you know, my pitch for Kabar was like very serious and like very professional, and my pitches for Butter or Worse and Set on You had like emojis and exclamation points, and like just were really goofy because that's who I was pitching to, and that was the energy of the book. And like I said, the authors for YA and for most YA and for romance are very goofy too. So it's kind of like you got to shift gears a little bit. You don't want to be using, you know, a bunch of heart emojis and silly faces for a memoir about like someone's partner passing away from cancer. Like, it's definitely like a shift in energy. But overall, it, you know, I'm able to work on a lot of different genres, and that's because it's not too different from book to book in terms of what's expected. It's just a little bit of an energy shift.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to wrap up, talking about working in publishing, working in publicity, take this question wherever you want to take it. But what advice do you have for someone maybe fresh out of college, or soon to be graduating like me and Sophie, or someone who's trying to get started on establishing themselves, in the industry or in a career? What kind of advice, either practical, personal, emotional, whatever, but what advice would you give to someone who wants to establish themselves in this field? What's something that they should know? What's something that was really helpful for you early on? Or just any messages you want to get out into the world right now?
Yeah. I think my first and most general piece of advice would be, don't take no from anyone, whatever that no looks like. I mean, I loved the publicist that Stephanie brought in, but I was really anxious about, when you're in college, a lot of people kind of push the master's idea on you. And while I would love to go get a master's in English or whatever, I don't have the funds for that. And so I asked the publicist if she thought, moving to New York and getting a master's was necessary. She's like, oh yeah, like you're gonna need a master's, like no matter what. And like, you need to move to New York. And that crushed me. I was like, I've been in this degree for so long. This is like my dream. And I've always wanted to do something in publishing. And now hearing that I can't do that unless I spend X amount of dollars and move across the country away from my family and away from what makes me happy, it was crushing. And so I think that held me back for a while because I never looked elsewhere. I just kind of gave up on that. So I think if I wouldn't have taken that no, and if I would have still believed like, oh yeah, I can do this, I think I would have found a job a lot sooner. And in general, like when I first applied for this internship and asked for a paid position, they were like, no, sorry, we're not going to be able to do that. And that's when I started not taking that no, and I just kept pushing. So it's about being persistent with what you want in general. And now, especially with COVID, a lot of publishing houses are hiring remotely. So depending on where you're looking to apply, you don't have to move to New York. It could be just like you travel for work every now and then kind of thing. And so the industry is changing. So again, not taking no for that is really important. You don't need a master's. Some people get hired here and they don't even have an English degree. Like they don't have a bachelor's. So I think the job is what you make it to be. And don't underestimate the value of getting experience outside of the industry and making that work to your advantage. I had little to no office experience or book experience other than my Bookstagram, and like I did an internship with Worlds of Words with Rebecca at the U of A, which I love that woman. She's incredible. But that was the only experience I had. And so I just worked my serving experience in my interview. I just talked about all the ways it's prepared me for the real world and all the skills that I've learned from it. And even though my boss later told me that she was maybe a little hesitant because I didn't have a ton of experience, the confidence I had really let her know that I would do well at this job. So just find the skills where you can and don't take no from anyone, because it's really a lot more doable than I think some people prepare us for. So yeah.
That is it's nice to end on a hopeful note like that. So
definitely.
I really appreciate that advice. There's so many people who do want to get into this industry, and it is very, very difficult, even just trying to get an internship. So I think it's good, especially because as women, sometimes we cannot be as aggressive as maybe we should be.
And then another like much more practical, realistic advice that no one ever told me except a past partner is to ask for informational interviews everywhere. So especially when you're out of college and you're wanting some kind of foot in the door, but there's no internships available or you don't have the experience for a paid position. I remember when I was looking for a job, I emailed dozens of places and just said, hey, like, I'm really excited and interested in your position that you are in right now. I'm fascinated by it. Do you think that you could take some time out of your day just so I can ask you a couple questions about, what you do and what your company is about? If you show interest, people love to talk about themselves. And when you send that email, also attach your resume and a cover letter, because you never know if they're going to hang on to that and then be interested in your interest in them and then later reach out to you. Because that's how I got the internship. It wasn't initially that I wanted an internship, but I wanted my boss to have my name in her head. And so I reached out to her and was like, hey, publicity director, that's pretty cool. Do you want to talk about that? And she was like, can you send your resume and this and that? And that's how I got the job. So don't underestimate the power of a cold email asking someone to talk about themselves. It's worked wonders for me.
Great. That is so amazing. We're so happy to hear that a fellow U of A alum has found so much success, budding success. I mean, you've only been there for a year, but still, I mean, pretty impressive in the publishing industry. And we really appreciate hearing everything you have to say and learning a bit more about you and also your role as a publicist. So thank you so much for talking with us today. We really appreciate it. It was a wonderful time.
Yeah, thank you. I love to talk about my new success and my job, and I'm glad I could help.